Welcome to the Wrap Party, brought to you by verybusy.io. This is a twice monthly kind of casual get together. I'm going to be bringing on people within our industry to talk about everything retouching and photography, commercial photography related. Today we have Sef. Okay, Sef. So you are a veteran in our industry. You've been around, what, 30, 40, 50 years?
Yeah, about that.
Just kidding. No. I mean, over 20 years experience.
Yeah,
I see
definitely.
you are a mentor in our communities. You coach a lot of artists, a lot of people within our industry about the business of retouching and post-production photography, commercial photography. And you yourself, working with global brands, global clients, everything from compositing, sports, tech, lifestyle, product photography, but, a little specialty in color grading and such too. I thought it would be great to have you on here. And, we had been casually struck up a conversation off a LinkedIn post you made about just client relations and how people deal with clients and manage clients. And this kind of led into another conversation just off like backing up further of how we are actually going to, like, how do people find retouchers to work with? So that's what our conversation is going to be about today. I am Peter Hunner. And we, I want to just kind of shoot off this conversation with this like a really broad question that we can dive into, and then we can kind of branch out from there. But starting back of just the simple phrase of, I want to kind of riff off a LinkedIn post you just had about, you, as I say, you're a producer. You did the photography. You were thinking, oh, we can handle whatever in house. We have a good graphic designer here, blah blah blah. And of course, the project balloons, things change, and all of a sudden, you actually need an experienced retoucher, somebody who knows what they're doing, that can turn around things on time, professionally, and you don't have to worry about files not properly being worked on. So, what do you do? Where do you find a retoucher? I'm going to throw that to you first. When somebody asks you, where do you find retouchers? What comes to mind?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be on the podcast, and I think it's great what you're doing with it because you're having conversations with professionals around subjects that are, I'd say, not really discussed on too many other platforms, outlets, whatever, podcasts. Is great because it helps fill in the sort of professional gaps and questions that people have that they just don't really have resources out there to learn from. So I love being a part of that. How to find the right retoucher for your project?
Loaded question. And it's not one simple answer.
Certainly not. But there are ways that I think both sides. So we're using this sort of catch-all term producer, and we take that to mean, the person who is shepherding the creative project from inception to final shipment.
Yeah. I think, though, a caveat, we could talk about from the producer, but also, even a photographer that needs retouching for a project that wants to work closely with somebody, or
for sure,
art director who is in charge of pulling in, looking for photographers, retouches and stuff they want to recommend for hiring. So I think that point person that's kind of put in charge of whatever project it is, that point person who's in charge of bringing in the team and is in charge of those decisions, whether it be the producer, photographer, this or that. But,
yeah.
But from that point of view, yeah.
And I think that's another important point for people to know is that we're using this catch-all term producer, but in different markets, that is going to be a different title. But this kind of encompasses everything. An art director becomes a producer when they start producing resources for the project. So does a photographer. And yeah, so when do you need a retoucher on a project? When's the best time to bring in a retoucher on a project?
I know my answer on that one.
It's probably the same answer that you'd say, when's a good time to bring in a producer on a project?
Yeah. I'm always a big advocate of bringing in, if you need a retoucher and there's going to be post-production within a project, like try to get them involved as soon as possible, even if it's from like a production standpoint, like, hey, these are the dates we're shooting. Please be mindful that if you can hold these dates for the project, of course that, but just from a strategic standpoint too, if you know you need a retoucher and you're going to go look for one, having them part of that early conversation can really help clean things up and streamline some stuff
and
in
save
the
you a
back
bunch of
end.
money.
So, yeah, it can save you a lot of money
It can
and
save you a
time.
lot of money and time and headache.
Yeah.
I think one hard and fast rule for answering when do you need a retoucher is, does your project involve photography?
Mm-hmm.
That right there is pretty much a red flag that you could probably use a retoucher, even if it's just on a consulting basis. It could be just somebody to get an extra pair of eyes
Yeah.
on the shots. Might not need much other than maybe some color tweaking. And
Yeah. And I think that right there, I mean, anytime you're making a photograph, there's some kind of post-production process that it's going to go through. Even if it's just, even you say, hey, we're going to go right from camera to print, you still got to output those files and make sure that, I mean, there's still
yeah,
something to be done.
yeah,
And there's a lot of in-house, in-house graphic designers and designers and stuff who I think do pick up some of those tasks sometimes if they're not too heavy-handed and it's
yeah,
something they know is in their wheelhouse. But there's a lot of projects, and I bet you've gotten this too, that get kicked back. You'll get an email saying, "Hey, we need help. We need a retoucher because first of all, our in-house guy thought he could do it, but it's not ending up the way we want it to."
I
So
get that
even that bringing in a retoucher just to say, "Hey, what do you think we would need for this project?" Just as almost like on a consult basis, you said.
totally.
Especially if it's a larger project, it's totally worth just getting a second opinion on like what do you think we might need.
Yeah, 100%. Because the worst case scenario is that, say during the course, say your graphic designer, your art director is good with Photoshop. They do have some background and they can do some cleanup and maybe some color grading. Um, Projects change all the time. Say the media buy changes and it's not just digital now, it's print and it's out of home. And that's when suddenly mid project, you've got some problems because your timeline changes. The worst thing for graphic designers or art directors or anybody else who doesn't really know pre-press, that causes a lot of anxiety because they're like, well, I can convert it to a CMYK version, but I don't know anything else about how to control how this is going to look.
Yeah, what should we be doing here?
Yeah, totally. And there is a lot of nuance. It's funny because print is such a dark art, and it's less and less common with so many digital spaces that we're making visual work for now. When you are faced with something that's got to go out to print,
Mm-hmm.
having an experienced retoucher on it who's like, no, 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 I got all of this. You
Yeah,
don't need to
especially
do.
one that no, there's a lot of retouchers that don't know that pre-press print side of it.
Yeah, yeah,
Which I mean, totally fine. I was just talking about this with my business partner here, Emily, and because we still have a lot of projects that do both digital and print.
yeah,
And when we have people looking and inquiring for retouching, it's one of the first questions that go out is what's the final output and use of these? Is
yeah.
it? But a lot of people are doing digital first. We're going to retouch for digital. You could just do a basic conversion to CMYK. We'll hold on to those files, but we always tell them, well,
Yeah,
okay, but if you're going to go to print, you'll probably need to change some things if you want your color right or something. But yeah, it's
totally.
it's it's an art that's fading out a little bit, or some knowledge base. I think that would be another great talk to have about is just the whole
Yeah,
CMYK
and
RGB workflow.
I could talk a lot about that because it is a lost form, but it is very important. But it kind of circles us back to this issue of who is the right retoucher
Yeah,
for your
totally.
project. And so to get back to the question of like, how do you find a retoucher? It can be tough because there's no like yellow pages in the phone book for retouchers.
Retoucher, yeah.
And it's really kind of a niche profession, I'd say.
Yeah.
There are way fewer retouchers than there are graphic designers.
Oh,
Um,
totally. And I think on that side too, just I think a common thing that people look for in the creative industry too is they're looking at Instagram, they're looking at LinkedIn, they're looking at a lot of social feeds, and they'll see, retouchers, photographers, all kinds of stuff. I always precaution again around that because
Yeah,
just because, and I think this goes not even just with retouching, but for any art form. Even a beautiful portfolio does not mean they're a good fit or looking for what you need.
true.
Because when it comes, especially retouching, you need to have the skills and you need to showcase what you've done and can do. But I mean, there's so much more behind it, from being responsive, being, restricting the timelines, being within budget, all these different things, being available, like,
Yeah.
so, that's kind of, I guess, I'm going to throw it out there as the first little thing is, going to those leading sources of just out in the world of socials and finding people. But by far, and I'm curious to know what you think about this, I think by far the best, hands down. And from a retouching side of it, most of our work comes in this way.
Mhm.
But I think word of mouth and asking your peers, um,
Number
is
one.
I think would be the number one.
Number one.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
agree.
because you get a
Um,
vetted response, like somebody who's gone through a project, which they've touched every aspect with that retoucher of the introduction to the pre-production, introduction, kickoff,
yeah,
actually doing the work, delivering work, staying on time, all that kinds of stuff, because there can be hiccups along the way. But
totally. Yeah, and it really is a word of mouth network that's probably most valuable to us as retouchers now. Um, and it's surprising. I think maybe a producer would be hesitant to ask around in some cases because maybe there's the fear that, like, oh, my colleagues might think that I'm trying to like poach their retoucher,
there's
or
always that kind of
yeah.
attitude too. I know it. Yeah, I mean,
And
people hold them close to their chest sometimes, especially when they're busy, because they don't want them to get booked up.
yeah, true.
So,
And but then again, I also find that many producers are open um to handing names out of good retouchers because they I think they if they've worked with them for a any amount of time to get to know how they work and it's been successful.
mm-hmm.
I work with when I work with new clients who maybe have just outsourced or maybe gone straight to like a retouching studio or house, however you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
The experience they get from me is usually like, oh my gosh, like I had no
Yeah.
idea how much you kind of like, white glove this whole
Oh,
process
totally.
through. And it's like, there can be very different experiences from very different studios. Some studios, it's like, you want more than one revision, like that'll be $500 per revision.
Yeah.
And
I
I've,
mean,
I've, I've heard from clients, they're like, yeah, we went to this place and it was like, they just nickel and dimed us on every single aspect of the job.
yeah.
And I'm like, it's true. It's so tough because you don't know what the standards of service are in the retouching industry. Um, and you can have a completely different experience. You can have some retouchers who are like, until you tell me exactly what to do, I won't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you don't mark up all of these things on your image for me to change, I'm not touching them.
Yeah.
Right. For me, I'm like, you know what? Just to save your art director time, um, she doesn't have to go through and do all the markup. Like, I know what to look for. I understand your brand. I understand the voice. I understand your standards of imagery.
Yep.
And they'll be like, really? I'm like, unless it's something major that you really need to explain to me, just hand me the work and it's going to come back to you looking like it can post
Look good.
to your site tomorrow. And not everybody's used to that experience. So
Well, then, yeah, and I think it depends on the type of retoucher too. So finding that good fit, like, are you an art director that's meticulous about everything that needs to be done to that image, or are you more somebody saying, "Hey, I'm gonna give you general direction and you take it." Are you hands off or are you hands on? So you got to find that right fit. because yeah, I mean, on larger projects or even small projects, if you're not working well, that synergy is not there. It's a bit abrasive, and
Yeah,
not only creatively, but also, I mean, just working from that kind of standpoint, it's hard. So you want to find a good fit for how you work, like how you want to get feedback or how tight of a rein you want to have on what's actually happening to the images, right?
true. Yeah.
Um,
And I mean, I have met many producers who just they just want the engagement to be much more like just straight transactional, like almost like
mhm.
you're just feeding images to a machine and you're like telling it what to do and it comes back perfect and there's really no like uh there's no like it's like paying directly for a service like a like a high-end commercial
Yeah, there's like
service.
no
Send it
emotion
out.
attached. It's just like a machine
And
of
I don't know what it is these days.
factory
Well,
line.
yeah, exactly. And I'll sometimes when I'm approached by a new client, a producer, and I start to get those, get emails that are sort of like worded in that very, very formal
Yeah.
way. I always, and I used to not do this, but now I really try to get to the human behind those emails. And I find that they're just used to working like that 90% of the time.
Oh,
That
totally. I
producer,
see it a lot in like, especially in agencies, like larger
totally.
agencies and the producers and some of the
And
production people in there.
some large brands, it's almost
It's kind
like
of a corporate setting almost
it is
sometimes
a corporate
now.
setting. And so much of what I do now is getting to the real human, the real creative person behind that email. And it's usually like, hey, I've got a bunch of questions. Can we jump on a quick call?
Hmm.
And once I can have that conversation, they're like, oh, you're a human too.
Yeah.
This is going to be cool. I'm not used to working with humans. They're
Mhm.
used to their art director, their designer, their team. But when they're looking for those outsourced services, I think a lot of times the experience can be just very, very formal. And
Well,
I don't
yeah.
think people are really digging that these days. I don't know.
No, and I think some of it too is just kind of the unknown in the post production area or in retouching. I think once you are able to open up a bit and talk with somebody and they are understanding of what the capabilities are, what you can do, what you're used, how you're actually used to working in the full process. I always side on like, I call it over educating or like, over like giving them too much information in terms of how sometimes this can go.
Yeah.
Um, the more you can get them at ease or just kind of get them familiar with what they're dealing with.
Yeah. Totally.
Um, yeah, it could definitely help things go smoother and hopefully they come back.
Well, 'cause yeah, and you know that tone of like a service provider who's trying to caveat every possible thing that could go wrong.
Yeah.
It's not a fun experience to have those conversations. And I think way back when I was really new to running a retouching business, um, being a high end retoucher who's seen as many different successful projects as I've seen, is easy to get into that mindset. So this is kind of something I'd communicate to retouchers as well. Um, when you're not sure what's going to happen with a project, maybe the brief is unclear, maybe you don't know how many images you're going to get or who the photographer is, it's easy to start the conversation just with this overemphasis on caveating every single possible thing
Hmm.
that could go wrong
Yeah.
just to cover your ass, which I get it, but it's a sort of a negative way to start the business engagement conversation.
Yeah. And I think, I talked about this a bit back on the estimating. I blog post in that and trying to cover a lot of those aspects, kind of being upfront as a retoucher. But, I mean, I always, when somebody's approaching me to work on a job or for an estimate or something and looking for a retoucher, trying to understand where they're coming from a point of view of like, they've got higher ups on their backs
Yeah.
telling them to do this, do this, do this, do this. And a lot of them, they're just relaying information and trying to cross their T's and dot their I's. There you
You can cross your
go.
eyes too.
Yeah, right. but yeah, you're setting your, being in the right tone and finding that right fit. I think there are definitely people who work better in a more like kind of black and white environment,
True.
and they need direction. They want direction. That's how they work better. They want those intricate notes. They want, they want to be told everything to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and I think there could be a mixed. I mean, I have clients that are like that. And then I have clients who, I feel like a lot of the photographer clients I have who we built a relationship, they know, I know what they like and how they
Yeah.
like what they usually like in their images. So they let you go and do it. So
There's
I'm
trust.
not, yeah. And I think that's another side of it too, is when looking for a retoucher, whether it's your first time working with them or it's a recommendation from a colleague, or you've worked with them for a while, you still are working with that relationship and you build upon it.
Yeah.
And that being comfortable, because I mean, you're putting a lot of reliability into them. You want them to come through, because if they don't do a good job retouching, it's going to be on you, because you're the one that's hiring them. You're the one that's having them finish your images. So,
Yeah.
um,
That can be
yeah, there's a
stressful.
lot of like, there's a lot of trust, and depending on the job, if you're at an agency or you're working on a big campaign and something, and you have no room for error, no room for screw ups, that's going to affect the way you look for a retoucher. You're going to probably look for somebody with extensive experience and portfolio to show it, that has done work really common to what you're working on right now. And I think that's where looking towards your peers and looking towards, friends, colleagues, all that, who, if you're an art director talking with other art directors who have done similar work, who have you used and had a good experience with? If you're a producer in the same role, asking other producers, or, even if you don't know them, I think reaching out to people, even if you don't fully know them, but you see the kind of work they're doing in that, and it looks similar, you can still ask them like, hey, who did this job for you? It looks great. Was it a
Right.
good experience? I'm looking for a retoucher. Um,
True.
so, I mean, kind of moving on off this first stepping stone of how do you find a retoucher? Yeah. So finding them organically, like social media and stuff like that. Word of mouth, of course, you and I both think is kind of top of mind, the best probably route to really find something that, is pretty trustworthy in terms of a recommendation. Somebody who's actually worked with the retoucher before, looking towards your peers. The other ways I guess I could think of are like industry groups, like Facebook, LinkedIn, retouching groups, or creative groups and stuff like that, and asking. But
Yeah.
I would, unless you know the people and the kind of work that's going on, and there's probably some very niche, really good, great groups out there. But yeah, and other than that, professional organizations, ASMP, APA, some local lists. I know here in Minneapolis, producer Aaron from Code Creative just stood up a kind of like a local roster of everybody from stylists to retouchers to digital techs to photographers. So there's like references like that you can look into. I think some of the cities have some local crew lists you could
Yes.
probably turn to find stuff. But again, it comes back to like trying to find somebody who has experience with a retoucher and can give you honest feedback of, how it actually went.
Totally. Yeah. And because for photographers, we have this, long tradition of rep agencies. And, as we were talking about earlier, it's so much more of an established history and structure that, art buyers, producers, and, anybody in agencies or brands trying to resource photographers, it feels like there's already an infrastructure in place that everybody's familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
a place for them to go and to just look and take their pick,
Yeah.
For us, not quite the same thing. There's no, fabric that kind of holds us all together and gives them an easy place to go.
And a
So,
reputable one at that. Like, you can find lists and stuff, but like,
right. It's tough.
if we're very busy, we were trying to reach out to retouchers and stuff to try and do some beta testing back in the day. And, we'd find, you'd Google city retouchers, and you'd
Exactly.
find, you'd see all the hits, and like every other one was like a broken link or wasn't around anymore. They were like coming and going.
Oh, totally. Well,
So
because
it's like, yeah, it's
retouchers are terrible at marketing.
we don't got time, right?
It's
No,
like
I
either
mean,
you don't
yeah,
have
it's
time or you have too much time,
yeah,
and suddenly, you're scrambling to, put together a website or have a presence on some social platform. And, starting from scratch like that, I think for retouchers who by nature are not really out there getting in the light, and
yeah. Well,
really,
that would, yeah. For the new retouchers, I always thought, what really helped Honey grow and how we built our studio is, we came from digital teching, but we had really great relationships with art directors, photographers, all just from digital teching. Um, and that carried over into the retouching when we reached out and wanted to pick up these clients and, saying, hey, this is what we're doing. We already had that connection and worked with them. So they knew how we worked personality wise, how we were.
yeah,
But the nice thing about our agency world is like every few years, everybody does a shuffle and they go to another agency and they
yeah,
get new clients. And then they're like, hey, we need a retouch. Okay, I'm coming over here. So it's like, 6 years ago, if you had a good agency that was feeding you work, now those producers, art directors, are probably at other agencies that are also looking for retouchers. So now you're, because it's multiplying. So,
yeah,
and it's a real effect. And that's how that really helped us grow and
yeah,
get a good kind of variety of work. Um, so that word of mouth, again, is top of list. So as a retoucher, being able to put your best foot forward and get those recommendations, I think, starting out, heck, I doing even to this day, still doing everything we can to make the client happy within means, like
yeah,
that, because there's little things you can do that can just save the project and save the world. That may not be a big deal to you, but to them it is.
yeah.
I think a lot of it comes down to timeline and rushing things, but you know,
Well, I've become way more aware and proactive of that, I think, after starting my own business. Because, in the past, when I was in house at agencies, there's a different sort of mindset. Now, I try to, I think of myself as the producer's ally. Whereas I think some people are like, tell me what to do and pay me. Um, you didn't tell me to do that, so why would I do that? Why would I go extra for you? These days, I just see how much more successful projects are and how much more successful the relationships, lasting relationships happen from really trying to figure out how to make the producer's job easier
oh, totally.
project, because the last thing they need is to answer yet another email,
Hmm.
answer a bunch of questions that you could have probably got answers to if you just looked a little bit more carefully. Um, Also, sometimes they have to talk to their stakeholders, and whether that's their end client, whether
Yeah,
that's internal stakeholders, and they may have to have technical conversations about the retouching work that I always say, if you ever need me to write an email for you,
yeah.
because
You need me
I'm
to
not
chime in.
I'm not going to teach you about what goes on with the RGB to CMYK conversion, because you're also managing a graphic designer, art director, approvals,
Oh,
CD.
totally.
Who knows?
You don't want to play telephone, anyways. It's
Yeah, yeah. I think it's important to recognize that you're not their only uh, job. They've got,
oh,
you know,
totally.
10 jobs. They've got 10 plates in the air, and you're one plate, and just trying to make that whole experience just smooth for them, you know?
Making their jobs easier, and and when they come to you, like if a producer comes to you asking about a certain job, um, yeah, I think a big way to help make lives easier is being clear on the information of a project. So if you're looking for a retoucher, having certain amounts of information readily available to give to them. I always prefer. I always joke, but I bet you get these emails all the time too. You get like a random email from someone, and they're like, "Hey, what's your rate? What's your hourly rate?" and that's it. And, it's like, that won't answer anything for you if I give you an hourly rate, like it doesn't really
Well,
make sense. But, um, you know, for those kind of scenarios, I always come back with kind of like a little laundry list of, okay, this is the information I need to give you something you can use, right?
right.
If this is a good project for us or not. And, also gauging, whether, their needs are more for the, they need budget allows or technicality allows, if it's more of a junior mid role, if it's more senior, is it,
Yeah.
where could this lie? But to get there, you need to know about the project. And I actually have I guess I could read off of my little laundry list of what I like to look for. How about that?
That sounds good.
Yeah. So first thing, I don't always directly ask for a budget. I like to give an estimate first, and then they'll usually come back saying, "Well, our budget is this." So I do keep budgets in mind when looking through a project and try to compare it to past projects if I can. Of like, okay, I've worked with this client before, or I haven't, or so and such. But first thing I always ask for is like a creative deck,
Yeah.
something creative that lays out the project. This kind of, what is this project for? What's it about? What's the style behind it? What's the inspiration? Kind of giving that full, a creative deck will give that full kind of scope of what the project is actually going to be. You can see perhaps what photographer they're going to be using, or who they're trying to get for a photographer, who's styling it. You can get all that kind of information from a creative deck usually. Second most, probably not second most important, but alongside that is a shot list. You need to know how many images are coming in. What kind of images are you shooting? Are you shooting product? Are you shooting lifestyle? Is this, we need a shot list. We need a shot list of what's actually going to be going on, what's going to actually be shot. And then along with that, and I think this is where it's hard sometimes, because a lot of the times they don't know if it hasn't been shot yet, but what kind of retouching do you need?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of times, and the more experience, I think the producer, if they've done the shoot before, they know exactly what they need. Like, hey, we need these
Right.
outlined, and they're going on this. Or if it's a more creative project, they know kind of like the direction they want to push something and what they can or cannot get in camera. But a lot of times there's gray area there, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing, I always tell them, like, yeah, if you have some unknowns here, right, we can give you a rough estimate, but
Yeah.
we'll have to be updated like kind of later on as well. Next, how about file delivery specifications? We talked about this earlier. Like, how are these files going to be? What kind of files do you need, and how are they going to be used? Is this like all digital? Is it digital and print? Are these going to be going on billboards? Are they, what kind of activations do you have? Do you have specific crops?
Right.
All that kind of like technical stuff, which this is another one that I think usually they'll be like, okay, I got to go get that information for you, because it's not all readily available. And a lot of times it seems to change for some reason. I don't
Yes.
know. It's like in the 11th hour, it's like, oh, we need this crop now, like,
Yeah.
what?
Well, it's especially with the digital spaces that we're placing stuff into. Those, we refer to that as the media buy. For people who don't know, the media buy is a sort of legacy term that was like,
Totally.
we bought a billboard, we bought 5 bus shelters, and we bought a New York Times half page. That was the media that was bought for this campaign. So now our media buys are, we need a banner that's 800 wide and 60 pixels tall or something like that. It's difficult to know all those specs. So do you ever find that you feel like in that discovery phase that maybe, or if you're worried that you might be asking too many questions up front because either they don't have the time, they don't have the answers, and that you might be seen as wasting a little bit of their time or giving them too much of a job?
I could see there could be that appearance, but given the way we like to work and schedule things out, like, if
Yeah.
they don't have a lot of these answers, it's kind of a red flag to me that maybe it's not the best fit for us.
Yeah.
Because we're not really prepared to go into a project that's scheduled for these 2 weeks, and all of a sudden it's going to be 3 or 4 weeks, or it's going to be pushed because things are changing, or we can adjust for that if we know, like, okay, yeah, we know we're going to have some image extensions. We're not sure what yet. Okay, we can account for that. But
Yeah.
you know, I like to be more well informed on in the front end, just because we need to prepare for it and schedule for it.
Yeah.
As we're kind of back to back on projects and stuff. I
Totally.
think, definitely there's a lot of times like, yeah, they don't have these details. I don't think I've ever gotten a lot of pushback. You get some of those requests where you just get ghosted. So
Yeah.
maybe that was part of it. Like, this is too much for me. And
Yeah.
okay, that's
Sure.
okay. And maybe we're not a right fit then. So I can see it both ways. But yeah, I'm more of the, like, I want to be more informed and try to get this like structured,
Yeah.
in a way, so I can at least somewhat predict what may or may not go wrong.
100%. I'm in the same boat. And I think about it from a producer's standpoint, where maybe they were used to not getting all those questions that you're asking, and they don't recognize that as value, as sort of a hallmark of someone who has a lot of experience, who will probably ensure that their project is going to be successful. So I think when looking for retouchers, that's an important point, is a good retoucher with a lot of experience who's going to take your project from beginning to successful end is not going to respond with an hourly rate and pretty much nothing else in the email.
Yeah.
Because
I would say that would be a red flag if they do.
That's a red flag for the producer. And that's why I love having these conversations is we're always talking from the retoucher standpoint, like what do we look at for red flags? And, I try to tell any of my producer friends when they're asking me, if you don't get asked a bunch of questions up front before getting a quote, you probably can't rely on that quote.
Yeah. It's going to be hard, unless I'd say the only times you can be more vague is if you've done, like, say it's a recurring project you do every year with them and you know what it entails.
True.
And you can be like, okay, here you go.
Yeah.
But out of the blue, if you're a fresh estimate and not a lot of detail or a lot of specifics. And on that note too, like you said, I think I'm this way. A lot of the really good producers I've worked with and were kind of like that brought me up in this industry were so detail orientated.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, hey, you also mentioned this before, where maybe they're not used to being asked these questions or knowing that they need this information, but that will make them look better in the end, because if they can be prepared for all this and like, there's been times I'm asking, hey, so what's, what kind of crops are you, if you're talking about cropping, or if you're talking about, is this for print or digital? And they didn't think about that. That's a whole thing that could have ballooned and caused a lot bigger, more expensive problem. Well, so, and
that's
also
great.
like a lot of those other little things, like asking, do you need like for delivery, do you need layered files for going to color separation or production or something?
Right.
And, there's all that kinds of stuff where if you have the experience enough to ask, because maybe you've gone through some of those issues before, it'll definitely help you in your job.
Yeah.
And it'll make them look a lot better and make their job easier too.
Yeah. They want no surprises. They don't want budget creep. But I find too, when sometimes a producer will not have a lot of the information about the project. They're just trying to get me plugged in, because, this is the balancing act that we have to do, because, we were at the beginning of the program, we were asking the question, when's the best time to bring in a retoucher? And as early as possible. But a producer might say, well, yeah, but all I have is like a loose creative brief at this stage. And I can't answer all these questions that a retoucher would have. So maybe I should wait to bring them in. So what's the solution to that? That's like a balancing act for the producer.
Oh, it totally is.
And for you, how do you quote? How do you estimate at that stage when nobody has the information you need? And it's going to be a little while.
I'd say, even if because I know a lot of times the producers, they're hung up on their client. The client isn't making decisions. They're not giving them info. It's being dragged on, but they still want to get stuff in line because they want to be prepared. So they'll ask, hey, you know what? I have a project coming up. I don't have a lot of information. I'm looking for incredibly just ballpark range of
Range.
like, I just want to get some kind of like some number to throw in there. Doesn't really matter too much what it is, but I need something. Is this something you're interested in? Buy this, really preliminary creative deck, and here's our rough timeline. We may be shooting in, December or January. I don't know. So then we'll get those a lot, and I'll be like, okay, yeah, we can pencil that in. We're interested. Usually, I'll try to rely on maybe a similar project we've done, and be like, okay, here's a range, and I'll pad it and give it something. And then usually when they finally get more information and tighter, then we can re-estimate it or actually give an actual estimate on it, because
Yeah.
even for then things will change a lot. So I still say let's side on, trying to get that team aligned sooner than later. I think especially when it gets into, I know for us, a lot of our repeat clients, we have scheduled out quite a bit and take priority. And then, if we get, people who refer us and are feeding us work, we like to prioritize too as a thank you. And so, the more you can get in line with them and at least ask them to pencil something in for you, like, hey, we're shooting this week. I think we may have images by this. I guess my last little bullet point on my laundry list was timeline and schedule. Even if it's rough, it's nice to have an idea of when things might come through. But yeah, so I'm going to run through this. So I did creative deck, shot list, the type of retouching, what kind of retouching you're going to actually need.
Yeah.
Media buy, file delivery specification, stuff like that. Timeline, and then kind of just the overarching process. Like, how do we want to send and receive files? How do you want to get feedback? All that kind of stuff. How do you want to interface with us? Who's our point of contact? Kind of laying that out there too. I always think it's nice to have one point of contact. Usually it's the producer. It just makes things a lot easier than having a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And also like art directors, it's nice when it's just like one art director consolidating notes for a team. So it's not like 5 different people sending you 5 different, requests, and I don't know.
That's a good. I have to comment. I have to comment on that because this is probably instructional for both retouchers and producers. I'll see this happen. I had it happen last year where the art director we'd been working with took off on leave, and new art director came in to fill in. And when they reviewed the images that we had already gone a couple rounds on, we got a case of new notes.
Yep.
I call it a case of the new notes. Mm-hmm. And I had to, it's a really tricky thing to communicate to a producer when that happens, because, trying to call it out via email, you could kind of seem like maybe you're complaining about like, new art director. It's not the same. Yeah. And you're like, no, actually, so this art director went back. This is now round 1 again. Mm-hmm. This is now the brief again.
You got to start over. It's different.
They're asking not for us to like fix mistakes or they're asking us to make changes to the image to their taste.
Yeah.
And that's tricky. And so a producer who you're really kind of like friends with, because I end up becoming friends with so many of my producers because we're solving problems throughout the whole course of a project together, trying to help each other. A good producer who you can talk to, I would say call them up on the phone. Anytime these more difficult, sticky discussions come up, I find that it is always so much better to just get on a quick call,
address it head on,
not do it by email, not do it by email, because nobody needs to type that much about things that could be totally misinterpreted, because some of those subjects are touchy, and it's so much better to get just like tone of voice and like, hey, so this is what happened. I just wanted to give you a heads up.
It gives it some weight too. Like, hey, let's jump on a call quick.
Let's jump on a call. Because
it's like, okay, there's a hiccup here. We need to talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
we get a lot of questions about, what, like, kind of around this topic here of
Yeah.
what happens if you go past your designated review rounds or things change and there's more work, and,
Yeah.
how do you address these things? How do you bill for these things? And, similarly, addressing it head on, talking with your client about it, I feel like a lot of times also making it clear that before you even start any of these changes, like if you're getting these, all of a sudden they want a fourth review round with a new art director that's going to be completely different. You're getting on that call with them. You're saying, hey, we're going to be starting over. Here's how much more it's going to cost.
Yeah.
And this is what you're going to expect if we go this route. And maybe they make adjustments, maybe they don't. Maybe they're like, okay, then we'll do it anyways. Who knows? It's their decision.
Yeah. True.
But I think, like, getting in front of it, and I think this, on the whole premise of this, being prepared for finding a retoucher and having this information is trying to get in front of any of these things that could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably couldn't foresee if a new art director was coming in and taking a place of somebody, or, but, and depending on this, on the actual, like, if we're bidding an estimate that's pretty big and our discovery call has 6 or 7 creatives on it,
yeah,
usually with the producer or who I'm talking to, I'm saying, hey, it's really nice to have one point of contact for creative direction and actual feedback.
Right.
So, and that's a lot of reasons why we were building Very Busy, and, finding a digital platform to manage feedback, but also trying to be clear on, hey, we don't want 7 different people going in and leaving a lot of times, sometimes, opposite notes, or like notes that compete with each other.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
So having that one point of contact is I think incredibly important, especially on larger projects with a lot of people giving input. And I think part of that too is the producer's job, is wrangling that and making sure that it's concise.
Yeah. And I think when a producer is talking, from her standpoint, when she's talking to you and getting all of this information, getting all of this, like, proactive management up front, if she's not used to getting that, could easily be working with a retoucher who's like, tell me exactly what to do. I'm not being proactive about all your stakeholders who might be giving notes. And then that silence is an indication that you're probably going to get a surprise.
Yeah.
You're going to be like, well, you didn't tell me about any of this.
Yeah.
And for the producer, it's really hard to know what the level of service should be and the level of, like, upfront care. So they go, I guess it was my job to figure out all of those crops and all the specs and managing consolidated feedback up front. But I'm only worked with like 2 retouchers before in my career. So,
well, I think it also speaks to, like, setting the tone. Like, if as somebody, if you're reaching out to a retoucher and you want to get an estimate and kind of understand if they're the right fit, providing them kind of an email with kind of all this information that they know like, if I get a well-organized email and I see all this, I'm like, okay, first of all, this producer knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And there's, I can foresee a production that's going to be well managed, that hopefully won't, probably it's not going to go off the rails. Things will be up front, professional, a lot like that, because it's when you see some red flags and initial emails, it's hard to take on some of those projects just because you don't want to deal with it. And you're unsure if it's going to conflict with other work you already have.
Right.
If it's not going to kind of fit within your schedule. So approaching this well thought out with the information. And then again, if you don't have all the information up front, being clear that maybe you just need a ballpark, or you're just trying to maybe lock in some options for when this project does come to fruition. Because again, you don't want to be in that situation where it's time to start, you guys are shooting the week before and you can't book a retoucher. You can't find somebody to do this for you. And that's a whole other issue, because then you're going to be stuck with maybe somebody that's not a good fit. So
true. And up front, I think if a producer doesn't have that experience that you're describing, when you look at your response and go, oh, that's a producer who knows what they're doing. So that doesn't, to help producers who don't know what they're doing in terms of the workflow of retouching and that process, I think an important takeaway is to talk to the retoucher, preferably on the phone, and be like, look, I don't have a lot of the experience working with retouchers that I know is probably a great asset, but I'm starting from here.
Yeah.
What can I expect from you in terms of being proactive, like helping me understand what stage we're at in the production, what you need? So there are no surprises for me. Like, how much can you help me get better at working with you?
Yeah.
Because that is what we kind of all want, is partnership, solving problems, not, oh, you didn't tell me this, so pay me more right
Yeah.
now. uh,
Well, that's the thing too. And there's always going to be hiccups and things will change. I've just given that's our industry,
right.
like,
Yep.
and especially within your immediate team, you sometimes have no control because it's the higher up client who all of a sudden changes their mind, and it's something completely flips,
Yep.
but you're still in the same timeline and this and that. And I think, being able, and I think it takes time, and again, leaning back on recommendations from people who have worked with retouchers, but the retouchers, the people you hire that will kind of stand by you and work with you during those situations, are the ones you want to keep around.
Definitely.
Because there's a lot of good retouchers out there, and a lot of people that can do a good job and get things done. But I think a lot of times what you should really maybe also look for hiring is when shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
Who's going to stand up and be there and take care of business,
Yeah.
and who's going to fall away and not rise to the occasion, because then those are the moments that matter, and those are like kind of those heroes appear in
Yeah.
productions, is you know
You don't want to be stuck in the foxhole with somebody who goes, not my problem.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, not my problem. You don't want to hear that. Yeah, no. And I you like you mentioned before, some people aren't, they could have been working with a handful of people and not used to a certain type of service.
Yeah.
And it could vary on the kind of retouching needed, this and that, or if you've always been working maybe with a senior retoucher, or maybe a small like specialized retouching studio, and not just an individual freelance retoucher. There's some variances there, which is a whole nother hour to talk about.
Yeah. I'm really,
But
yeah, absolutely. And I'm really curious because there is so much more to unpack on these subjects. And I'm really curious afterwards. And if you're watching this live or the recording, be sure to just give us a little bit of feedback about what more questions you have. What would
oh
be
yeah, we
more?
want to know what to talk about here. So
Yeah. 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 We're trying to see it from everybody else's perspective to actually give a little bit more practical um, help for people. I think,
yeah,
I think that's the
I think
best
a lot
out.
of times, I was going to say, a lot of times too, some of this stuff seems second nature to us just because we're living in it and deal with it as retouchers. But hearing what people actually are interested in and need to learn about from
Right.
us
It
is
could be,
wonderful.
it could be Peter's, checklist that he was going down of like my
Oh, totally. I'll
pre
post that actually. Hopefully
pre-touch
somebody finds it.
checklist. What do we need to cover before we start, and how many gaps do we see in that before
Mhm.
we get worried? And then what do we do if we're worried? Do we just go, no, not for me? Or do we use that tactic of jump on a call, get the human on the line?
Be
'Cause lots,
proactive. Yeah.
lots of times I'll get an email that's very formal and kind of maybe it's a red flag project. If I can get them on the phone and talk to them, so often they're like, yeah, man, I mean, and it's a totally different tone from the email. It's like,
Oh, totally. It's gonna be totally, yeah.
I know what this looks like. This looks like it might be a nightmare. This
Like a
is what I'm
producer,
dealing
it's a
with.
junior producer in the trenches, like just trying to survive. And
And half the time they'll be like, "Look, I know your cost is just a range, and I'm gonna keep an eye out. I'm gonna make sure that you get paid fairly for this, and then you can relax a little bit
yeah,
because you're getting that one-on-one, and that tends to always make things more comfortable, and two people are in the same boat,
yeah,
producer
being aligned.
and retoucher, same boat, trying to
Get rid of
figure it
the
out.
anxiety. Yeah. Well, totally.
Yeah,
Well, heck, that hour has gone incredibly fast.
pretty quick.
I feel like we still have a lot to talk. I think you need to come back on for another hour soon here, and we can either continue this conversation, branch out a bit, because we have a lot of other things we could talk about.
Totally.
I do want to, I want you, like, how can people find you? Where are you at these days? Instagram, website?
So you can find me at theretouchist.com. That's theretouchist.com. That's for my education, my plugins, my tutorials. That's all going to live in that ecosystem. For my business brand, my retouching studio, it's Aesthetic Machine. So you could find me at aesthetic-machine.com. And yeah, you can find me on Instagram and all the other socials at Sef McCullough. I mostly like interacting on LinkedIn these days. So if you have any questions, you can connect with me there.
Heck yeah. And you're going to be doing some writing for our blog. You got an article coming up here soon.
Yep.
So be sure to check out the Very Busy blog, verybusy.io/blog. We got a lot of other great content on there too. I wrote an article about pricing, retouching pricing. We got some some great stuff coming up.
Pricing,
we also have
that pricing article was incredible. It's helped so many people already. If you're looking for a comprehensive look at how to do pricing, that's the first one I know of that I've seen online that's accurate, useful, in depth, and you just kind of show everything. You kind of show.
Well, I'm going to expand on it too, because even after I wrote it, there's more things that have been populated. So there's going to be either a V2 or an edited version, an updated version coming up.
Cool.
Another call out, we have our 2024 retouching survey, retouching industry survey. If you go to verybusy.io, you'll see a banner at the top to take the survey. This is for retouchers out there. We want to hear all about how we're collecting information on the actual retouching industry and trying to figure out demographically, based on location, based on what kind of retouching you're doing, based on everything else, a lot of other things. What state is our industry in? What are people charging? What kind of work is garnishing, higher pay and lower pay? All this kind of stuff. You'll see the survey. There's a lot of questions. It takes about 12, 15 minutes to take. We've garnished a lot of people submitting stuff, so we're really excited. I think it's open for another 20 days, and then we'll be closing it and compiling all the information and publishing it for free. We'll be out there. We'll post it on the socials and on our website. So keep an eye out for that and go take it if you're a working retoucher. And as always, follow us on Instagram, verybusy.io, LinkedIn too. And like Seth said before, we want to hear what you guys want to hear us talk about. From a retoucher standpoint, being in the retouching industry, in the commercial photography industry, we want to kind of really dive in and talk about the specifics that we don't really hear about a lot within the retouching community. And I don't know, hopefully build up a new community and something we can all converse in and rely on each other for. So thanks for listening in, everyone. Thank you, Seth, for joining me. We'll have you back soon.
That was great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Bye.